Under fluorescent lights or candlelit rooms, whether in silence or in storm, your presence bends the frame. You don't walk into rooms. You rewrite them. The energy, the pacing, the way conversation slows or stumbles when you step in. Not because you ask for it. Because you don't have to. You're not the loudest voice, nor the most adorned. But you carry the kind of gravity that demands orientation. People find themselves facing you even when their backs were turned. They blink slower when you speak. Their hearts skip. Not from attraction, but from the realization that your gaze sees straight through the armor they stitched from pretense. You are what they fear in fiction, the character who changes the story by simply arriving. They crafted entire scenes without you, spent months rehearsing lines meant to frame their own glory. They played heroes in their heads, orchestrated dialogues where your role was non-existent. But then you showed up, unapologetic, composed, and suddenly their narratives began to crumble, not because you challenged them, but because your existence did. It made their rehearsals feel like parody. Their arcs collapsed under your authenticity. You didn't need to be introduced. The atmosphere announced you. Your silence made more noise than their declarations. They weren't just intimidated. They were reduced. You didn't steal the spotlight. They just realized they never owned it. It wasn't your charisma. It was your clarity. You weren't hunting the next scene, the next line, the next performance. You were present, fully, embodied. That's what disturbed them. Background characters run on scripts. Predictable, safe routine. But you broke the rhythm. They couldn't anticipate your next move because you weren't there to be digestible. You weren't built to be understood in a glance or summarized in a whisper. And that's terrifying to people who only exist through recognition. You don't need the crowd to echo your words. Your breath alone sets the tempo. Your stillness disrupts their choreography, and they hate you for it. You have what psychologists might call disruptive presence, a psychological charge that demands recalibration from anyone nearby, not because you're loud, but because your existence presents a threat to artificial harmony. People find themselves performing better or worse around you, but never the same. You force a kind of introspection they didn't ask for. You awaken the gap between their identity and their potential, and that chasm, it's uncomfortable. That's why they envy you. Not for what you do, but for what they become in your shadowing less. You are the variable they couldn't rehearse for, and now they can't unsee you. They'll try to dismiss it, of course, mock term, call it a go, say you're too much. But pay attention to their behavior. Watch how they linger on your words, how they mimic your phrasing days later, how they orbit conversations you're in, even when they claim disinterest. Because the truth is, you've become the reference point. They adjust themselves based on you now. Their jokes, their clothes, even their timing. They're trying to maintain relevance in a reality you didn't just enter. You altered. And no matter how loudly they resist, their bodies betray them. They flinch when your name is mentioned. They glance sideways when you speak. Because you're not competing. You're defining the competition. You didn't ask to be the main character. You earned it by surviving chapters they wouldn't have. You endured betrayals that would have unraveled their script. You suffered scenes they never imagined, rewrote the plot mid-chaos, and emerged with a spine unbroken. That's what makes you terrifying. Not that you're perfect, but that you're real. You carry your scars like subtext. You let silence speak for you. And people feel the depth without needing to know the details. That's what makes background characters twitch. They built themselves on visibility. You built yourself on truth. And yet, your power isn't flamboyant. It's restrained, refined. You don't need to correct them. Their insecurities do it for you. You don't need to interrupt them. The silence you leave in your absence haunts them louder than confrontation ever could. You're not obsessed with impact, but impact clings to you. Because you live the story, while they only recite lines, and they know it. Deep down, they know the camera would follow you if this life were a film, that the angles would favor your stillness over their noise, that the plot would pivot the moment you decided to speak. So they scramble, trying to reclaim the narrative, attempting to box you in, call you arrogant, detached, aloof. But none of their labels stick, because the audience, the silent observers in the corners of rooms, see you. They recognize the authenticity, the depth, the weight of a life lived in alignment. And slowly, they start looking to you for direction, for tone, for how to breathe in a world full of performers. That's when your haters lose their grip. When they realize they're no longer the default voice. They're the side note, the blurry figure in a shot meant to center you. But don't let this become your distraction. Your story isn't about them. It's about your becoming, about choosing clarity over comfort, depth over performance, legacy over likes. Let them fade into the background, not from cruelty, but from consequence. They weren't written out of your story, you simply outgrew their page. And now, with every step, you write the kind of arc that bends reality around it. Let them watch. They tried to trap you in a story they wrote without your permission. A story stitched together with their fears, their misunderstandings, and their fragile egos. They projected weakness onto your stillness, mistook your silence for uncertainty, interpreted your grace as guilt. They needed you to be smaller so their comfort zones wouldn't fracture. So they labeled you, boxed you, categorized you with convenient terminology that made them feel in control. But you walked through it all. Through their illusions, their fragile frameworks, their psychological gravity, you walked through like fog, untouched, unclaimed, unfazed. You were not what they expected. You didn't shrink. You didn't flinch. You didn't offer apologies for being more than their minds could handle. You didn't ask to be explained, translated, or softened for easier digestion. And that shook them, because they live in assumptions. That shallow waters where everything is either understandable or rejectable. But you operate in depth, in layers, in dualities they can't name, much less contain. So their assumptions bounce off of you now. Their projections crumble under the weight of your actual presence. Because nothing they imagined about you stands in the face of who you really are. You are the contradiction they cannot conquer. They said you were too cold, until they realized it was their own discomfort reflecting back. They said you were arrogant, when it was just their inferiority being exposed. They said you were mysterious, when it was really their inability to axe your truth that unnerved them. Every label they gave you said more about their limitations than your identity. And you saw it. You studied their words not to internalize them, but to understand the architecture of their fear. And now you walk through those labels like smoke. They touch nothing. They land nowhere. You don't wear the names they gave you. You wear the silence that made them invent them. Because the moment they realized they couldn't define you, they tried to confine you. That's always their second move. When projection fails, control steps in. They shifted from labeling to limiting, from assumptions to accusations. You're distant. You're difficult. And they said it like an insult. But you took those words and folded them into your spine. Yes, you're different. And that's precisely why they can't understand you. They keep reaching for tools to measure something that was never meant to be quantified. They use yardsticks of conformity on a force made of chaos and clarity. You are the riddle they can't decode. But what they didn't realize is that every attempt to label you was a silent confession, a mirror turned on themselves. When they called you threatening, it wasn't because you were. It was because they felt threatened by the way you didn't need them. When they called you unpredictable, it wasn't your behavior. It was their inability to manipulate your reactions. You exposed how much of their identity was built on controlling how others see them. And when you stopped participating in their script, you ruined the illusion. You refused the role they wrote, and the play lost its audience. Now, you move like truth through a room of fiction. You don't need to shout or prove or perform. You've transcended their game entirely. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your strength, not your intellect, not even your presence, but your refusal to be defined by anyone's wounds but your own. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't beg to be understood, someone who doesn't explain or negotiate their identity. You are not for consensus. You are not for comfort. You are the storm that walks calmly. You are the chapter they didn't want to read, but cannot stop thinking about. So let them label, let them whisper, let them warn others of you like you're a cautionary tale, because each time they try to reduce you to a label, the label breaks first. Their vocabulary cannot carry your essence. Their categories cannot sustain your evolution. You are too fluid to pin down, too conscious to be corrupted. You are made of things they gave up chasing long ago. Dignity, self-possession, truth. And when those things walk through a room, everything that's false begins to tremble. This is where the game flips, where you stop walking through projections and start casting them back. You've become the mirror now, the frame that reveals, the silence that screams. You've learned how to say nothing and still ruin reputations. Because your growth, your detachment, your refusal to play by their emotional rules has turned you into something mythic. They don't just fear you, they study you. They try to find the seams, the weaknesses, the code. But there is none. You are whole, and that wholeness invalidates every broken thing they still cling to. They thought you'd bend eventually, that enough sideways glances, enough whispered distortions, enough forced misunderstandings would finally chip away at your sense of self, that you'd slow down just to clarify, dim yourself just to be received. But you didn't. You outgrew the urge to explain. You stopped seeking permission to exist outside their emotional vocabulary. You realized something critical. People only need to label what they can't control. They name things to tame them, and you refuse to be domesticated by their fears. So now you walk among them like an unsolvable equation. You speak less, but your presence punctuates every room like prophecy, and it drives them mad. They feel in the way the room recalibrates when you speak. They see it in how others watch you. Even when you say nothing, they sense the weight of your knowing, the way you carry memory and fire in the same breath. You've become an atmosphere, not a participant. And that elevation forces everyone else to face what they've avoiding, that control over perception is meaningless when someone doesn't need to be liked. You became one who doesn't chase rebranding. You became the one whose story tells itself, without apology, without edit noise. And when people like that exist, the world takes notice. The liars take cover, and the ones who try to define you start whispering about you with fear disguised as fascination. They tried to simplify you but couldn't survive the complexity of your truth. You were layered in ways they couldn't predict. Compassionate without being naive, intelligent without flaunting, unmoved yet not cold. You scared them because you made being whole look natural. You walked through their projections not because they didn't sting, but because they didn't stick. You outlived every version they tried to trap you in. They threw confusion, and you birthed clarity. They threw gossip, and you walked out wrapped in silence. They threw doubt, and you emerged with faith louder than proof. They couldn't control you, so they tried to define you. And when that failed, they started to fear you. Fear, after all, is the last refuge of those who can't manipulate. When admiration becomes unattainable, envy grows its teeth. And so, they called you many things, too much, too distant, too calculating. But they never once said, wrong, because deep down they knew. They knew you had read the room from the start, knew that you carried more than presence. You carried proof, that the way you looked at them held the entire story of who they were pretending to be. And no one likes being seen that clearly. You forced a confrontation they were not prepared for, with themselves. So now you don't walk through projections. You glide through consequences. Every step you take is a mirror turned toward them. Every breath you take is a refusal to be undone. You are not just a survivor of false narratives. You are their end, a walking contradiction to their illusion, a living testimony that no amount of mislabeling can dilute what's divine. You were never meant to be understood by the crowd. You were meant to make the crowd question itself. And that is the truth's terror, to walk through people's stories and leave them wondering who they really are once you're gone.